I'm going to miss you folks. You know, some people are on TV, some people are on digital TV, some people are columnists. You know, whatever makes the world work, whatever people like to do. My first love is and always has been, I mean, other than family and my wife, is radio. Radio. Tell you a little story. When I was 16 years old, actually before that, I would go to bed with a little transistor radio that I got from Radio Shack. It had AM and FM, and it actually had international, but you could never pick up anything no matter how much you move the antenna. It's a good radio. I kept it for like 20 years, and I think it fell off the table and broke, but whatever. And I think it cost me like $20. At the time, that was a lot of money. I think my allowance back then was like 45 cents a week or 75 cents a week. The good old days when you actually could afford something. But I went to bed listening to talk radio in Philadelphia. And on the weekends, I would listen to talk radio. The station was called WCAU in Philadelphia. Now it's WPHT. WCAU was one of the earliest stations, the historic stations. It was started and owned by Paley. Paley, who would eventually go on to purchase more radio stations. Then when TV came into being, he created CBS, the CBS television network, and so forth. But this was really, early on, his diamond in the rough. It's got 50,000 watts, as all the first round of stations do. WOR. There's stations in Albuquerque, Mexico, Albany, Dallas, in Oklahoma, all over the country. And the reason a relative handful of stations had such massive wattage, some of them actually have 100,000 wattage reach, is because it was viewed as a national security issue. There needed to be an ability to communicate throughout the country. And we're talking about the late 20s here. So I wrote the program director at WCAU, now WPHT, constantly. Maybe 5 times. With an idea for a show. Have I ever told you this, Mr. Producer? With an idea for a radio show. Once a week. For teenagers. Out of the blue one day, and I wish I remembered the gentleman's name, the program director said, well, we can't do a show. And I know why now, because teenagers wouldn't listen to it. They can't sell spots. Okay. But why don't you come in and you'll do one show with one of our hosts? And we'll give you the whole half hour of the show all to yourself. Now, what do you think about that? Do program directors do that today? I doubt it. And this was on one of the biggest stations in America, with one of the biggest reaches in America, WCAU. So I went on there, and I was down there with my mother and my father. I was around 16. I wrote notes. Boy, was I nervous. I don't remember what it sounded like. All I know is when I walked out of there, I was pretty happy. I've always had this in my blood. I would also, late at night, when I was supposed to be asleep, fiddle around with the antenna on the AM dial to reach a station you may have heard of before in New York, called WABC. WABC. I've been listening to WABC as a Philly kid since I was 15, 16 years old. I'm 66 now. There was one host there who really, really drew my attention. Bob Grant. Now, he was fired at some point. He went to WOR, and then he went down to Philly, to one of our talk stations there, and then he went back to WABC. But later in life, I became very, very close friends with Bob. What a great guy. But I also remember calling him when I was a teenager. I was very nervous. I think it was the afternoon, one of the afternoons. And I had mentioned to him, I support Ronald Reagan. I think this is 1976, maybe 80. No, it was 76. And, young man, who do you think should be his running mate should he run? Who would you suggest? I said, Jack Kemp. You're a very intelligent young man. I remember him telling me that. But that's never going to happen. Because the Republican Party won't allow two conservatives on one ticket. He's probably right. I loved Bob Grant. And in Philadelphia, on the old WCAU, very late at night, maybe I believe it was starting at midnight, till about 5 a.m, on the weekends, there was a fabulous host. A fabulous host. He was hilarious, smart as hell, conservative, and he created this whole genre. He called them the Little Rascals. Now, obviously, you saw it on TV, but it wasn't done on radio. And what the hell? It's midnight to 5 a.m. And those phones were clogged from the minute he came on the air. I should know. I spent an hour, 2, 3, trying to get through. Back then, we had the finger dial phones, not even the push button phones. And I got a really long extension. And I go up to the floor where there wasn't any bedroom, nobody was sleeping. I think we had an old pool table there. My parents, very modest means. And I'd pull the phone into the room because the phone plug was in the hallway. And I'd shut the door, and I would dial and dial and dial with my finger. And you tried to time it, so when somebody hung up. And it became a very big family from time to time. The guy's name was Bill Corsair. Bill Corsair, one of the great radio pioneers that doesn't get enough credit. And married to his beautiful wife. And they're still with us, thank God. And he's a Vietnam vet. Great patriot. And I would call and call and dial and dial. And if I didn't get through Saturday night, he was there Sunday. I'd do the same thing Sunday. Could be 4 a.m, 4:30 in the morning on Sunday, and there's Mark. And everybody gave themselves a name, or he gave them a name. So I gave myself a name. As a young teenager. You remember the name I gave myself, Mr. Producer? The Matzo Ball Kid. I don't know why. Everybody else was coming up with names. I called myself the Matzo Ball Kid. And I would call. And Bill Corsair was polite. He was funny. He gave the callers time. Just terrific. I would listen weeknights to a guy on the radio who would later become a TV guy, Larry King. Larry King did a hell of a radio interview. You didn't even know his views back then. I'm talking about half a century ago. You didn't know he was a liberal. You didn't know what he was. But he gave great, great interviews on radio. And I'd listen to him. And others, locals in Philadelphia. A friend of mine, am I boring you, Mr. Producer? If I'm boring you, I'm boring everybody. No? A friend of mine, well, he got to do a weekend show on an FM station that became a talk station. But his time was 1 a.m. till 5:30 in the morning. My buddy Ken. And Ken was a great guy. He was a conservative activist. And so I would drive down there. maybe I was 18 years old, 17. Go into the studio and sit there with him for 5 hours and watch him do it. Every now and then slip him a thought, or during the break slip him. He said, keep them coming. They're interesting. And then, one time, you may recall I was listening to this fella. I forget when it was, maybe 1991, something like that. By the name of Rush Limbaugh. Never heard him before. I got to know the people around him, especially Kathy Gleason. And just unsolicited, I would fax, because back then I wasn't much of an emailer. I couldn't get on AOL. You know, it kind of popped up around 1988. It was so slow. On constitutional issues, on legal issues. Unsolicited. He says to Kathleen, who is this guy? And Kathleen was always very generous with her time and with giving me credit for sending things from time to time, constitutional issues, legal issues. So out of the blue, one day I hear, Mark Levin, the director of our legal division. Of course, there was no legal division. And then I would hear soon him calling me F. Lee Levin. F. Lee Levin, the director of our legal division. Wow. Was I proud? And one weekend, he invited me down to his home in West Palm Beach. Actually, it wasn't a week away. It was a Saturday, Sunday, but also a Monday. And back then, he was trying to broadcast out of his house. The HOA chased him down. He had to move his studio to a beautiful townhouse in Palm Beach, but he really wanted to do it from his house, but he had to stop. But at that point, a few weeks, I sat right next to him. I was watching everything he did. I'd give him notes from time to time. He loved it. And when we were done, when he was done, he said, you were watching me very closely. You're watching me very intensely. He said, you want to do radio one day, don't you? I said, yes, sir. I said, okay. And he was right about that. Then there was another gentleman on the scene. Came on the scene later than Rush, but I would listen to him. I'd listen to him on WABC. I said, this guy's good. I don't know who he is. I never heard him before. And his name was Sean Hannity. Now, Sean Hannity wanted me to substitute for him, particularly during the Christmas holidays. That's where you find a lot of great hosts, by the way. Other stations, other regions. I said, no, I don't think I can do that. I've never really done a whole show. He said, no, you can do it. I said, look, my problem is the ins and outs. You know, I can talk the substance in between. I'll be right back or coming back. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll teach you how to do that. He had me come to his house. Nobody had to do any of these things. He had these 5x7 cards. They were blue. And on each one, he went over with me. There must have been 40, 42, 52, I don't remember. Hi, I'm Mark Levin. I'll be right back. Or, hi, this is WABC. Welcome back. He called the formatics. He said, listen to me. This may seem stupid, but it's going to make your show smooth because you have all it takes to be a host. You got the substance, but it needs to be smooth. You get in, you get out, you do the substance. He said, so instead of being nerd, just grab a card and read it like a monkey, getting in and out. Made all the difference in the world. And then a program director by the name of Phil Boyce at WABC. This guy, second to none. He said, I want you to do a Sunday show. Management won't pay you. It's from noon to 2. I said, I'll do it. I mean, to learn this on the biggest radio station in America, in the biggest city in America. And he had faith in me. And you know what he told me? He threw me in the pool and said, you're on your own. Now you either swim or you don't. And he promoted me and supported me from then on to my position at WABC that I had, because nobody was getting any ratings 6 to 9. They were getting killed by sports. And they were losing to WOR. And it went from there to syndication and so forth. I'm telling you all this because people ask me this all the time. How did you get started? And since it's the Christmas season and we're almost there, now you know.